And I'm going to make a quick review of what are the tools that we typically have available in the context of EXO and in general for disrupting, okay, for disruptive brainstorming. And some of them are great, but I would say in general, they're just not enough. So in the methodology that we use, the EXO, the Exponential Organizations book and the framework and the methodology, there's one fundamental attribute, which is the attribute of the massive transformative purpose, that overarching attributes that allows us to connect with abundances. And it's a great attribute. It really is. It describes the kind of future, the kind of utopia that we want to participate on building. So it's very aligned with the values. It really describes what floats your boat. And in that sense, it allows you to empathize and to connect with other people whose vision or whose massive transformative purpose might be the same. Might that be a company or another individual or a community, etc. So amazing. But see, this is descriptive of where you want to go, not how you want to get there. And actually, the very definition of the MTP is very precise about this. I mean, it needs to be open-ended, so it doesn't, it's not prescribing the way you're going to reach your massive transformative purpose, because of course that approach that currently makes sense tomorrow might not. So you need to have the freedom to pivot and to iterate your approach towards that MTP. So once again, the MTP is really good to have. I mean, it tells you where you want to go, but it doesn't give you a clue of how to get there. So in that sense, I would say when we present these to teams, they love the concept, of course, because it's an amazing concept, but the question is always, yes, great, and now what, right? So I would say it lacks specificity. Another approach that we've inherited from Singularity University is this idea, or from Google X, is this idea of the moonshot thinking. I really like this. Try to identify massive problems and then try to pair that, or opportunities, and then try to pair that with exponential technologies and so on. It is very interesting. It's really bold, and it encourages you to think 10x instead of a 10% increase. And in that sense, I really like it, but it's a legitimating approach. It doesn't really give you any insight of how to do things either. So that's why I think it needs to be complemented with another approach. There's a new one that I really, really like, that is actually generally my first recommendation to people. Identify your core competences and try to understand where your core competences, in what different industries, or Rita McGrath describes them, in what other arenas these competences could be relevant. Because if you find those core competences that could be relevant in another arena, it'll be much easier for you to be relevant in that arena than the people living in that arena that want to disrupt themselves. Why? Well, because we have the problem of the immune system. There's too much routine, there's too much inertia, and when you jump from one arena to the next, you don't have all of those inertias. I'm thinking of a sprint that we did a couple of years ago with a global company, HP, based in this case in Barcelona, and they identified as a core competences the capability using these printers, right, to do precision placement of ink. So the question was pretty straightforward. We are very good at doing this, precision placement. Now, where is this competence? Where can this competence be relevant? And so very easily, they come up with the understanding that they could become relevant on the health industry or the makeup industry, etc. Right? So that is a really good approach that really resonates with this idea that 90% or 80% of the transformations process fail. It's much easier to be relevant in another arena than in your own. So very recommendable to do so. There is yet one more approach, that I really like, which is the approach of using each one of the exponential attributes, the EXO attributes, as a perspective for the massive reinterpretation of what you have in front of you. Okay, you have a reality, a business model, a functioning business model, or a business model that you're projecting. So now what if you took each one of the 11 attributes, each one of the 5 external attributes and the 5 internal attributes, and one by one you try to reinterpret massively, radically your business through the lens of that attribute. So what would my venture be if we were the paradigm of algorithms, if everything that we did rotated and pivoted and was articulated around algorithms? And then let's project that image. Probably it's going to be exaggerated, but at least it'll give us an idea of what others could be doing. So we are not limiting our imagination. Then later we will come up with probably a reduction or a combination of several attributes. But I think this approach of reinterpreting the initiative through the lens of each one of the attributes is really interesting and can also derive into a disruptive idea. Why? Well, basically because you are identifying scarcities in your current business model, and you are replacing them with abundances. Sometimes that might be a transformative effect, and some other times it might be just a disruptive effect. So a very interesting approach. So that being said, I mean, we have approaches that to some extent work, but I believe that that's not enough. I mean, at least not in my experience. And I have quite a broad experience, not only as a coach. I participated in the foundational sprint, which is something that I'm very happy about, with Salim and with Francisco Palau, and with an amazing client that was Interprotección in Mexico. And from there, I've participating in really many different sprints, and also in trainings. And my learning there was that disruption is definitely related to technology, but it is much more a cognitive of an issue than a technological of an issue. So it's not that much about the technologies, but about what we do with them and how far we can project them, and how much of a transformation we can make with them. And so that is why I complemented the existing tool set for disrupting innovation with my own, with a series of frameworks and shortcuts and suggestions that I do to all my teams that I describe here in yellow. The thinking out of the moat approach, which is really relevant now that we are changing scarcities for abundances. It really makes sense to understand what are the scarcities and what are the things protecting those scarcities, and how those very things, those competitive advantages or those moats, might be ready for disruption. So that really helps us to signal where disruption might come from. It will really allow us to identify the disruptive challenges and the opportunities that we have ahead. So no longer do we have to think outside of the box, but also we need to think outside of the moat. That is a strong recommendation. I'm not going to go too much into it, and I would say it complements the previous one of identifying abundance and so on. But there's others, and I'm actually going to be concentrating on some of the others. There's others like the Jeopardy checklist for the quality questions, which is a very simple checklist that I really enjoy. There's the hypothesis versus assumptions concept, which I think is of paramount importance. And then there is a methodology, a framework that I designed myself, which is the ideation to idea approach,